Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Farmer Greg here, and welcome to the 585th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where every day we work together to educate and inspire you to become part of your food revolution. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you probably already heard me talk about the Edible Backyard Summit. It's a 3-day online food growing inspiration and education event. Thousands joined us for our summits in 2020, and we're at it again. If you enjoy the Urban Farm Podcast, then I can pretty much guarantee you that you're going to love the Edible Backyard Summit. It's just like the podcast in that it's free, and you'll learn a lot from experts in their fields. And unlike the podcast, you get to see the presenters and have your questions answered live. Plus, there's usually some fun conversation happening in the chat box for those who want to join in. The upcoming Edible Backyard Summit airs live March 23rd through the 25th with informative presentations that food growers of all kinds will enjoy. Whether you are an inspiring newbie or a seasoned expert, and whether you live in an apartment or have acres to grow on, you'll learn principles to follow when you plan and place your garden, regenerative composting techniques, patio farming for small spaces, hacks for year-round gardening, and lots more. To sign up for free, head over to ediblebackyardsummit.com. And if you have friends and family that love to garden, please invite them too. This is a great opportunity to do something fun virtually with other food growers in your life. If you're ready for some spring gardening inspiration for your most vibrant, healthy, and self-reliant life, I invite you to join me for the Edible Backyard Summit. Sign up at ediblebackyardsummit.com and get ready to create the edible yard of your dreams. Today on our podcast, we have someone who is transforming industrial agriculture. We're talking with Eddy Badrina about growing vertically in greenhouses. Eddy is a graduate of Texas A&amp University and the Bush School for Government and Public Service. He has had mission-critical roles at the U.S. Department of State, executive leadership at a White House initiative, and director-level positions at 2 successful startups. And he is CEO of Eddy Green Technology, a vertical farming technology company dedicated to changing the way we farm our food and feed our communities. Welcome to the show today, Eddy. Are you ready to rock hydroponics?
I'm ready. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at today?
Absolutely. So I spent the first couple of years in my professional career up in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
I was an analyst for the State Department covering the Middle East and a variety of other topics, and then switched over to the White House where I was President Bush's Asian American spokesperson. I ran his White House initiative for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders for 2 years.
Wow.
And from there, I moved back to Texas, was in a little bit of, and I think many of your audience can relate, I was in a little bit of a wilderness, if you will, a transitionary career wilderness, trying to figure out what I was really good at, what I wanted to do, and then how I can monetize that. So I spent a couple of years doing strategic development for a bank here, and then jumped off to be the director of comms at a telecom startup here in Dallas. And then after that, I figured I could do it on my own. That telecom startup was really a chance for me. It was my MBA of hard knocks,
Right.
From the school of hard knocks. I learned finance, I learned operations, sales, how to run a business, investor relations, all that stuff. So probably a little bit of confidence, maybe a little bit of naivete, but I figured I could do it on my own. So I started a communications and marketing consultancy, and then joined up with my business partner at the time in 2010. I started a digital agency called BuzzShift. We ran that for 6 years. We sold it, and then 11 months later, we bought it back, which is a whole other story. But while I was doing that, I had met a number of folks in the investment world, and then honestly in the ag world, and as I was coming out of that, after we bought it back, I was able to take a step back from that and think, what could I be doing that has an impact on the world around me, exponential to my level of effort, right? So, not a lot of people ask, like, how did you get in this? I have a degree from A&M, but how did you get into urban agriculture? And it really, the business that I was running and was able to just afford me the ability to step back and really take a look at what I wanted to do in addition to that. So there are three things that had been put on my heart. One is I wanted to run a software or hardware business. I'd done professional services, been there, done that, got the M&A T-shirt. The second is I wanted to have an exponential impact of my level of effort. So for every 1 unit of effort that I put in, I wanted to have a 10 or 20x return on my level of impact on the community and society around me. And then the third, I just wanted to be a part of and help build a unique company culture that was redemptive to society around it. And so Eating Green came along and had an opportunity to jump on board as CEO, and that's where I've been for the past 14 months.
Wow. You and I have a little bit of a similar background. I ran several technology companies in the 80s and 90s, and by the end of the 90s, I was looking at it thinking, this isn't really contributing to the world. I need to do something that contributes to the world, and I absolutely love the way that you presented it a moment ago. Thanks for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. There's a weight and there's a responsibility and there's an absolute joy in running a company that's putting food on 25, 30, 40 people's and their families' tables, and there's a value in that. But like you said, I think both of us probably took a step back and said, okay, there's that, and that's really useful, and it's valuable as a business owner. It's valuable as an economic creator, an economic engine within our community. But is there something even greater than that? And so that's what I was looking at before I got into Eating Green.
Nice. So what is Eating Green?
So Eating Green is we're a turnkey vertical farming technology. And what I mean by that is we are able to build and manage and then license our technology of these 1.5 acre greenhouses that can be put almost anywhere in the world, can be put in urban environments, suburban environments. And what they do is basically they shrink down 35 acres of traditional farming and harvesting into 1.5 acres. So if you think about one of our 1.5 acre greenhouses, which are standard size modules, is they produce right around, depending on the vegetable, right around 1 million pounds of leafy greens a year.
What?
Yes, 1 million pounds out of 1.5 acres.
Wow.
And that's equivalent to roughly 35 traditional farming acres. What's not equivalent is our environmental sustainability compared to a traditional farming setup. So traditional farm, that size, 35 acres, 1 million pounds of leafy greens, consumes around 870,000 gallons of water a year.
Wow.
Our 1.5 acre facility producing the same amount of harvest consumes only 90,000 gallons of water a year. And your household and my household, on average, consume 45,000 gallons of water a year each.
Whoa.
So 2 households of water can produce 1 million pounds of leafy greens in one of our greenhouses. And we do that through these patented 18-foot vertical towers. I mean, they're tall. It's just a wall of greens. If you ever have a chance to come down to Fort Worth, Texas, I'd be happy to give you a tour, any of you, your listeners or you, and you can see these walls of greens in action.
How cool is that? So you're actually going vertical.
We are going vertical. So most traditional greenhouses that you see, and even one of the more advanced ones, out in Kentucky, App Harvest is building these huge 60-acre farms, which is fantastic. They work with square feet. We work with cubic feet, right? So our ability to work with cubic feet adds exponential density to our greenhouse, and then it makes it that much more efficient.
Wow, I'll bet. And you're using sunlight then. These are in greenhouses. These are not in warehouses.
Absolutely. So we use sunlight complemented with grow lights. So Sunlight, obviously, there's a consistency factor
Yep.
from a commercial perspective that needs to happen. And so what we found is we've been able, just through our technology, we've been able to harness sunlight as much as we can and then complement it with grow lights. What that does for us is it combines the efficiency, the energy efficiency of a greenhouse with the harvest and density of your fully controlled environment ag platforms. So a lot of what you see in these fully enclosed ones with grow lights, all grow lights, no natural sunlight, is that their electricity costs are on par with data centers.
Right.
They're enormous. And so you question, like, okay, you're growing a lot. You have a smaller land footprint and you're growing much more than a traditional farm, but you're using so much energy. So there's a trade-off there in terms of sustainability, both environmental as well as economic. I mean, it takes a lot of cash to install those lights. Those lights are expensive, and then it takes a lot of overhead to run those lights for the amount of time that's needed if it's fully enclosed.
Right.
So we've been able to solve for that by using mostly sunlight and then complementing with grow lights.
How cool is that? And what do you see as a future for vertical farming and agriculture? Where are we going with this?
So we think it is the future. We don't think it's the silver bullet, but we do think it's the future for a lot of commercial agriculture. And so there are two reasons for that. If you look at the overall market trends and the overall demographic trends, you're seeing an uptick in population. You're seeing a magnetizing towards an attraction towards urban centers. Even with the pandemic, people are moving. They're just moving from one urban center to another. Maybe they're going more suburban, but the reality is they're within at least 40 miles of an urban center. So you've got an uptick in population, you've got an uptick in urban or suburban living, and at the same time, you've got a downtick in the amount of arable land. You've got a downtick in the amount of usable topsoil. I think the UN estimates is we're going to run out of usable, like the first layer of natural usable topsoil in 60 to 100 years. It's not that far away.
If it lasts that long.
And if it lasts that long, right? And then all combined with that, you've got increasingly volatile weather patterns, right? Climate change. And then lastly, it's a consumer trend. People want more and more. I've seen anywhere, I've got friends in the industry who are seeing a 400% increase in the demand for locally grown foods here in the U.S. So you combine all of those trends together, and there's this huge delta of supply and demand. And the only thing that can fill that delta in is vertical farming, is enclosed agriculture. It's really the only solve for it in combination with your traditional farming.
It's the perfect thing to do in cities because we have such shortness of land. We just don't have a whole lot more land. So what do we do?
Exactly. And so, when you think about one of our modules, the great thing about it is an acre and a half is not that much land when you really think about it. So if you can put an acre and a half, not 2,000 miles away, but 20 miles away from the people who need it, all of a sudden you're shortening the supply chain, which is, we've seen in COVID, because of COVID, the supply chain has just been exposed as more fragile than we thought it was.
Oh, big time.
We're getting shortages of everything, right? Chipotle's running out of romaine lettuce. Whole Foods, some of the leafy greens are just, the walls are bare because people can't get them, or as soon as they get them in, they sell out. I mean, and then that's not even to mention the basic necessities like toilet paper and paper towels, and
right?
All that stuff, right? So we're seeing a fragility in the supply chain because of the length of the supply chain, as well as because of the pressures put on that length of supply chain. So if you can cut that supply chain down by a factor of 10, then all of a sudden you are upping the supply that actually goes into the system. And then, the other thing too is loss. When you have to transport that amount of fresh produce, that amount of miles, you're going to lose. The industry average in the grocery and retail industry is like, they account for anywhere from 30 to 40% loss.
Isn't that amazing?
Which is, it is incredible.
Yeah.
So in our greenhouses, our conservative loss estimate in our greenhouse is 3%. Conservative. And it's probably even lower than that, but we just, for projection's sake, we say 3%. Now, if you're only losing 3% in the greenhouse, and then it's 20 miles away to the distribution center or to the store, your losses go down exponentially as well. Wow. That is why we think vertical farming is the future.
Nice. And what is the difference in safety of the products? I just saw a recall of 3,200 units of basil because of potential contamination. I suspect there's a different level of safety here as well.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. So safety is, there's a number of ways that our greens are safer. First is they're grown in a facility that's not exposed to the elements. So we know of farms, organic and conventional, that have had recalls, not because of something that they were necessarily doing to their plants or land, but because of environmental factors around, like what's in the air around it.
Yep.
I saw one report about it wasn't from the farm, it was from the farms around them. There was runoff from the farms, the cattle farms around them, that seeped into their groundwater and then contaminated their plants.
Wow.
Right? So there are a lot of factors that even these organic farms, they want to control, but they can't. And we only give our plants what they need when they need it, and in an optimal way. And so there's a safety aspect to it, which if you walk into our greenhouse, you look at any of the photos, I mean, it is as clean as you can possibly get for an ag industry. And then the second factor is if it's clean inside there and you have a minimal amount of time in the supply chain, then the cleanliness also extends to that supply chain, right?
All right.
If it's only in the supply chain for 48 or 72 hours, there's a much less chance of outside contaminants getting on it. And then when it goes into the grocery store, then it's ready to go, or it goes into a bag, it's ready to go. So we think because of the way we have a culture of food safety at Eating Green Technologies, it's not just a program, it's a whole culture. And on my weekly staff meetings, the first guy up to talk that I call on is our food safety director.
Oh, nice.
He's a dedicated food safety director, and he's the first one that talks, because that we are so consumer focused that has to be, that has to be at the top of our minds.
And you touched on what an experience might be walking into one of your greenhouses. Can you tell me what that experience might be and how it might smell and look?
Sure. So I'll try to paint a verbal picture for you and your audience. So you walk into our one of our greenhouses. When you open the door, probably the thing that you notice immediately is it's translucent all the way around. Walls, the ceilings, because it's a greenhouse, it's translucent. You walk in the door and you get a rush of wind out. And that's because our greenhouses have positive pressure, right? What that does is that keeps the ambient temperature more consistent, but it also minimizes the amount of pests and things that are coming in on your clothing, right? It minimizes that coming onto you and sort of transporting its way into the greenhouse. So after that rush of wind, you put on your smocks. We have smocks, we have hair nets, and then we have masks. And then you walk into a vestibule where you put all that on. You step on a decontaminant pad, right, that helps wash the things off of your shoes while you're tracking into the greenhouse.
Yeah.
And then you step in from that vestibule into the greenhouse itself. The next thing you do is you take a hard right to our washing stations, and you wash your hands. And you sing a song, and you wash your hands for 20, 30 seconds.
Right.
Dry them off, and then you start the tour. You go to work. That's for everyone. That's for our workers who go in there. That's for our guests who are in there. Everyone has to go through that process. So from the get-go, and we put the smocks on, not necessarily because we're protecting us, but we're putting the smocks on because we're protecting the plants.
Yeah.
Right. Anything that you track in, you put a smock over it, and it basically, it muffles it, if you will. Right. It keeps it from transporting through the air. So smocks, hairnets, masks, and off we go. So you walk in and you'll see, depending on the greenhouse, you'll see either our propagation row, because that's where we seed the plants and then propagate them until they go into our system.
Uh-huh.
Or you'll turn the corner, or you'll turn the corner from that propagation row, and you'll see 18-foot walls of plants. And what you'll see if you look down the rows of that acre and a half is you'll see rows that are empty, rows that have just been planted, rows that are growing, and rows that are about to be harvested. So you see sort of this real-time progression of growth if you look down the rows, because that's what we call our perpetual harvests.
Mm-hmm.
One of our greenhouses harvests anywhere from 11 to 13 times a year. Our cycles are usually anywhere from 28 to 35 days. And so you'll see there workers every day, they're either harvesting, planting, or maintaining the greens that are in there. So you'll see a perpetual harvest all throughout the greenhouse.
Wow. So you're getting food all the time.
All the time, which is another part of the consistency piece, right?
Yep.
When you can harvest every week, then you just got a steady flow. It's not in huge bunches where you have to store. You've got just a steady flow of leafy greens coming out of harvest and onto trucks and onto the distribution centers. So that's another great advantage.
Wow, no kidding.
Of our system.
Man, you're making me want to go out and buy one of these things and go for it.
Come on. We would love it. We would love it.
So what are you growing?
So we grow around 50 plus varieties of leafy greens, herbs, and then strawberries, actually.
Oh, wow.
We're in addition, we're testing out peppers. We're testing out other types of varieties. The great thing about it is we've gotten international attention. And so where some of the folks who are in this space are locked into a piece of land, right? Either on the West Coast, East Coast. Our differentiator is that we're mobile and we're flexible. We can put one of these acre and a half greenhouses almost anywhere in the world. We can adjust to local regulations, local building regulations, local coding regulations, but also we can adjust to local cultural tastes and preferences. Mm. So in Asia, they grow a lot of chard. They grow a lot of pak choi.
Yep.
They grow different types of Asian style mustard greens,
mm-hmm.
And which we don't eat over here.
Right.
But we can grow them in our system. So our R&D facility in Cleburne is constantly testing out varietals from all around the world so that we can prove to entrepreneur-led investor groups, we can prove to nonprofits, we can prove to nation states, we can prove to local municipalities that we can grow, our greenhouse can grow what they need when they need it for the people that they actually want to eat it.
Yeah. So there is this conversation out in the world right now that, growing leafy greens, that's great, but those aren't the staples for our diet. And what are you guys doing to address that? So
the trends are actually dictating otherwise. We're seeing growing trends in the want for basic wants for leafy greens as opposed to meats. We're seeing from an ingredient perspective, a rise in the need for plant-based meat alternatives. So what we actually think and we're seeing it, there's an unbelievable increase in demand for leafy greens as a basic foodstuff.
Wow.
And then in the rest of the world, besides the United States, the vast majority of what they're eating are plant-based.
Yeah.
Because meat is just expensive, right? We have first world problems here of choosing, prime versus Angus versus grass-fed versus dry-aged, all these meats, free range, all, chicken, all that stuff. In the rest of the world, a meat is a luxury. And so they're eating a lot more plant-based meals than we are. And so that's where we see, hey, this is a basic food source. Lettuce and chards, collard greens, spinach, all of those are basic foodstuffs for the vast majority of the world.
And are you growing organically?
So we are pursuing organic certification. The interesting thing about our industry, it's so new, so nascent, is that there's not a great industry association that's pushing, that's an advocate for vertical farming. And so the organic certification was pushed by the traditional ag, industry it's very useful to denote how things were grown, but it's also sort of a marketing play. It's not a bad marketing play. I'm a marketer. I love it.
Yeah.
Right. But the reality is there are some qualitative differences in organic versus conventional that at the end of the day, they're just that. They're qualitative and they're subjective in their marketing. So we're pushing for that, but we believe we're actually better in some senses than organic, because again, as we discussed earlier, organic farms can't control the air around them.
Right.
They can't control the water that's coming, that's feeding their plants, and they can't control the farms around them. So there's both above ground and below ground external factors that are affecting whether or not they can be organic or not. Whereas ours, we control almost all the factors. That our plants are both the ambient environment around it, as well as the nutrients, water, and that are going into it.
Well, one of the things that I was targeting with that question was the nutrients. I know that with my tower garden, and I have a third of an acre here in Phoenix. It's where my house sits, and so I have 8 or 10,000 square feet of growing in the dirt space, and about 8 years ago, I discovered tower gardens and bought one and use it every year. Absolutely love my tower gardens for growing greens.
They're wonderful.
Yeah. And the conversation about organic there is that these are mineral-based nutrients, so they're not chemical-based nutrients. So I guess that was more the question I had for you about the organic part. The nutrients that you're using, tell me about them.
Yeah, so it's called fertigation, and the Dutch have really mastered fertigation, both in terms of how the controls and the systems, as well as the nutrients that go into it. So you can actually, and we have organic nutrients that go into it, right? Mm-hmm. And they are mineral based, and nothing is synthetic, as well as our pest control. Nothing that we use is synthetic. So. But at the end of the day, what we're really wanting to know is, what do the plants need to grow the best?
Yeah.
Let's dial into that, and let's give them only that stuff and nothing that they don't need. And so, the nutrients that we give, both in terms of the quantity, parts per million, as well as the channel that we give it in, the water, where our water temperature is optimized for both nutrient absorption as well as oxygenation, as well as plant health and minimizing any sort of plant pathogen. Uh-huh. You can't do that in any other system.
Right.
Or from a traditional perspective, no farmer can ensure 67-degree waters is going in their plants and they're absorbing it, right? We can absolutely do that. So not only are we giving them the right nutrients that are not synthetic, but we're giving them in a way that they're going to be optimally absorbed, and the plants are aerated as well in a way that's optimal for them. So then that's why we can grow plants in 28, 35 days.
Yeah. One of the things that I know from growing food is that we need to be building healthy soil, and that healthy soil has a lot of microorganisms that positively impact the plants and then positively impact the foods. What do you guys do about that?
So that's a good question. So in traditional farming, what we're finding is, and you've probably seen this as well, is the traditional farming methods are sucking more of those healthy microorganisms out than they're putting back in, right? Unless you've got very few farms that are actually doing that in a regenerative way. Uh-huh. And regenerative farming is something that's really interesting to me as well. But unless you're doing regenerative farming, you're really not getting those microorganisms in anyway. They're being sucked out. Mm-hmm. So it's really comparing. If you want to compare that, then I would compare it to regenerative farming. I would compare all farming, both controlled ag as well as traditional, to regenerative farming. That's more of a polar comparison, if you will.
That makes sense.
But if you compare ours to traditional farming, then I think we're better, because again, we're putting the nutrients that they need into the system. When it comes to microorganisms, here's where again, first world problems. We are splitting hairs when we're talking about good, better, and best, right? When you talk about all the great microorganisms, you're going from better to best. We're not in the business of solving between better and best. We're in the business of solving food shortages. We're in the business of solving in a meaningful and healthy way, right? So most of the rest of the world, and honestly vast parts of America, aren't concerned about going from the 90th to the 95th percentile of like optimal health and nutrition for a plant. They want to go from 0 to 80.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to solve for that 80 to 90%, right? We can give them, we can supply greens. Our greenhouses can grow these greens and herbs and berries in such a way that it gives 80 to 90% of optimal plant health, and then transfer that into someone's digestive system, right, onto their plate. That's what we're looking at. So I understand and I appreciate people who, and especially there's probably a lot of folks in your audience who are really concerned with that, and rightfully so, on an individual basis, in grow your tower gardens versus growing in in the soil. Mm-hmm. And what I would say is that's not scalable to the population. Yeah. It just isn't. I'm not thinking about folks who, like you and me, have a third, half an acre of land, and we've got disposable income to buy a tower garden. I'm thinking about the single mom or the single dad with 3 kids living in an apartment that, after their second job, they stop by the bodega or they stop by the grocery store to pick up food really quickly before they can get home and cook their dinners. Or maybe they're cooking their dinners late. That's who I'm concerned about. And they're going to grab a bag of leafy greens, and they're going to know just in the back of their mind, hey, this is healthy. So whether it's conventional, whether it's organic, whether it has all the microorganisms in it, whether it's the 99th percentile of plant health, they're not concerned about that. They're concerned at a general level of healthiness and of nutrition. That's what we want to address.
And get food in their stomachs.
Yes.
Wow. Good job. That was a great explanation, comparing the different levels of food. I love that. I get asked all the time about people with gardens in their yard and say, well, if I'm gardening in the city, what about all the pollution in the city? And I am a big, big believer that no matter where we are in the world, there's pollution, and we just have to do our best. And it sounds like that's where you're going, is you're doing your best in providing the best quality product that can be produced under our global current circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, us having this hybrid solution of greenhouses, which are enclosed, but still using as much natural sunlight as we can, mm-hmm. is a great, efficient solution to it.
Yeah. Good job, man. I love the work you're doing.
Man, we are super excited about where this industry is headed, and specifically where Eating Green is headed in terms of just empowering people, empowering communities, empowering entrepreneur-led investor groups to grow their own greens and to find ways to sell them and distribute them.
Thank you so much for all that great information. I'm going to shift on you now, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
So in my first business, we set core values of focus and of doing what we do best, right? But as any small business owner will tell you, your focus is tempered by, honestly, by cash flow. And we bootstrapped this company, no debt, no lines of credit. And so in the first couple of years, we landed a really big telecom company as a client, really big. But they asked us to do things that were way out of our expertise and scope, that by a degree of magnitude that was too out of focus. Business owners will tell you, like, hey, sometimes you have to say yes and you figure it out on the way.
Right.
And that's totally feasible, right? But this one was a degree of a difficulty that was too out of our focus. So we thought we had made it because of the client's brand recognition, it's a really big brand, and the size of the contract. But we ended up spending about a year and a half spinning our wheels with it and being really, really inefficient in execution. So the result was there's a great top line revenue, but horrible profit margins. And even worse, our team was burnt out. So it crushed our team's morale by the end of it. And that was our mistake. We thought the big brand, we thought the big contract was going to fulfill it, but it was contrary to our core values of focus and doing, what we do best. So how do we overcame that? So we actually resigned ourselves from the client, to their surprise, because it was such a big account. I don't know if any other agency had resigned from this client for no other reason than just saying, hey, this is not a right fit. It took us about a quarter to level set our top line revenue for our company.
Yep. We
had to get really lean and scrappy, but it totally rejuvenated and saved our team in the long run. I would, if you asked me, I would do it all over again. Knowing what I know about the hit that we took to our top line revenue, totally do it all over again, because we learned to focus and focus more on our core values and on what we do best.
We recently built out our core values, refreshed them and built them out in the last 6 months. And it has made all the difference in the world in the decisions we're making on moving forward.
Absolutely. It can't be just a piece of paper that you post up on your,
right.
Your wall or, in the break room. It's got to be things that you remind yourself of on every staff call. It's got to be things that you remind yourself of every, monthly review, quarterly review, performance reviews. They've all got to be just inculcated in your daily rhythms. And if you can stick to those core values, what happens is it dictates the why of why you make your decisions on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis.
Yeah.
It dictates who you take on as vendors, dictates who you hire. It takes who you have to let go. It dictates, how you want to respond to market trends. It all stems from core values.
Yeah.
That's your anchor point. That's your North Star.
Amen. I recently had a customer that wasn't too happy with us, and I shared with them the core values that we created and said, this is who we are and this is where we come from. And, I don't really know how it landed with them because they just went away. But in me sharing that, it was that view from the outside looking in was a huge thing for me. It was like, wow, this is really cool.
Absolutely.
So
I bet.
What do you consider your biggest success?
So this sounds odd, but every year at Christmas, my family and we get cards from all of our friends in the United States and around the world, actually.
Uh-huh.
Enough cards to fill up an entire wall of our entryway. Like it's incredible. It sounds silly, but I love seeing those cards from all around the world because it represents the friendships that we've made and kept and deepened over, our 20 years of marriage and our 20 years of family. So we in turn send out close to probably 250 to 300 Christmas cards a year. It's kind of fun. But I think that is my biggest success, I feel like, is those wonderful relationships and the depth of those.
Yeah, love that. And what drives you?
What drives me? So my faith drives me. I follow Jesus, and he just asked his followers to do everything with excellence and diligence, just because it reflects a thankfulness and a gratitude for the gifts that have been given to us. So I just try to operate out of a posture of gratitude to contribute to the community around me with excellence and with diligence and consistency.
Yeah.
That's what drives me. That's how I try to operate.
Nice. So living a life of gratitude is transforming. That I know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it totally changes how you treat people, how you look at people. When you live a life of gratitude, you look at people with a sense of grace and mercy rather than disdain or adversarial or, what's their problem, right?
Yeah, right.
It totally changes your posture, and it changes your posture with your partner, with your spouse, with your family, and you just have more compassion because they're going through something, or probably, when it comes to my family, it's probably because of me, right?
Right.
So it makes me look in the mirror, but that thankfulness and gratitude allows me to look at them and myself with a sense of compassion.
Yeah. Wow. And if you could recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be and why?
Man, this is a hard one. I've got so many books.
Right. This is why I ask it.
Golly. So there's a book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, who's a former FBI negotiator.
Uh-huh.
Probably one of the best negotiation books you'll ever read. And for business people, for business leaders, I think it's an absolutely essential book in your library, because everyone negotiates every day with your employees, your vendors, with clients, whatever. But the one that I think is really, really just reference material is Principles by Ray Dalio. It's probably the ultimate reference book for business leaders and business owners.
Nice. And why is that?
So one, he has a wealth of experience. He runs Bridgewater, which is one of the largest funds in the world, but he's just very humble. And he's got a great philosophy and posture about how he runs his business. But the second thing is, it's how it's structured. So the beginning of the book, it actually has it. He tells you, hey, don't read this book from end to end. Here's a table of contents. Here's it drilled down by subtopic. Flip through those, and when you need to reference a specific topic, look for it and then go straight to that chapter, straight to that section. Don't try to read this thing end to end. So he's written a business book, and he's written, honestly, it's in a sense autobiographical, because it really runs through how he started the business, how he runs the business, how he treats his employees, all that good stuff. But he does it in a way that in the very front and from the outset says, hey, this is how you can reference it. I don't want you to read it through and through. I want you to pick and choose. And so because of that, it just makes for a great business reference book.
Nice. And the name of the book and the author again?
It's Principles by Ray Dalio.
Nice. And what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
I would say to remind yourself that each of you are valuable and that you're made for something special. I mean, you're so valuable. Each of us is so valuable that we've all been given a set of innate gifts. And when you can focus on those gifts and what you do really, really well and strive for just ever more excellence in it, it will absolutely bless those around you. And that discipline and that focus on those gifts will actually free you up to innovate and expand in other areas without sacrificing the excellence in what you are or what you want to be renowned for.
Wow. You know, I have to tell you, we've been chatting now for a little over 45 minutes, and these conversations are the kind of conversations, number one, that I strive and hope to have in the podcast here, and that give me hope for our future. So thank you.
I really enjoyed this conversation as well. It's I love being able to talk with folks who are like-minded, who have an eye on the future with some feet and some practical reality in the present, and are just trying to solve for that gap, and doing it in a meaningful way and really in a personal way like this. So I enjoy and welcome these types of questions and these types of conversations. It really gives me life.
Yeah, right back at you, man. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Eddy.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure being on it.
And how can our listeners find out more about you and find you?
So on the web, it's just www.edengreen.com, like Garden of Eden, green.com, all one word. And then on the social handles, they're all Eden Green Tech. So on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Eden Green Tech. And then me personally, I'm at Eddy Badrina, at EDDY Badrina, Badrina, on the socials, or badrina.com.
Perfect. And you can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/Eden Green.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.